California. We had Bishop Megan Triquare, who came and blessed our solar panels. So this is just the right time to be able to talk about how do we get to that point that we could celebrate being a net zero carbon church. So I would like our chair for Care for God's Creation to begin with a land acknowledgement, and then I'll say a prayer and do a little bit of housekeeping right before we get started. So Ann Lou, will you, oh, do I need to unmute you? I'm sorry, let's see if I can get that to work. Oh, I had it. Try that again. There you go.
Welcome, everyone. We should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Cachildehe, Band of Winton Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzaldehe, Winton Nation, and Yochadehe, Winton Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected. As elders have instructed the young generations, we are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for that. I'm going to share a prayer. Wonderful God, your love and faithfulness surround us in the air we breathe, in the water that nourishes the earth, in the people who care for us. May your spirit prompt us to meet you in the place of partnership. Move us into action as we live out the call to righteousness and faithfulness. Amen. Just a couple of really brief housekeeping moments. You have probably all been on similar calls to this and know most of the drill at this point, but just to explain how we're doing things today, you'll notice that you're muted. What we're going to do is we're going to have Gerry give his presentation and slideshow first, and then we will have plenty of time for Q&A. So what I'd love it is if, as questions occur to you, you can put them into the chat, and Nick and I will be trying to keep track of those, and so that we can help seed those questions when it comes time for the Q&A. And when you do, when we get to that point, we're going to ask you if we get to hear from you, to have you introduce yourself. But really, it's just so great to be able to have a bunch of you here. I know others are going to be watching the recording later, and probably we're going to have people joining us as we go along. So before Gerry starts, I just want to take a moment to introduce him. I totally lost my screen that had his information on it, so I have to go back and try to find that. Gerry, I do know this. I do know that Gerry and Nora have. Sorry, were you going to say something? Oh, I thought I heard something. Gerry and Nora have, they joined St. Martin's 14 years ago after moving to Davis. Gerry earned degrees in mechanical and nuclear engineering, held research, program management, and commercial leadership positions in national and state government, electric and gas utilities, solar manufacturing and retailing companies, and the University of California. A climate action advocate over the past 3 decades, Gerry retired from UC Davis in 2012 to spend more time on local climate action and local renewable energy integration. He serves on the City of Davis Utilities Commission and the Valley Clean Energy Community Advisory Committee. And if you were here last week when we had the bishop here, and Nick mentioned that 2 years ago, roughly, Gerry gave a presentation talking about how far we had come in terms of reducing our carbon emissions and saying, here's what I think St. Martin's needs to do next. Here are the next few steps. And it was such a wonderful presentation that it was just what we needed to sort of push us over the edge to say, oh, that's doable. We can make those next few steps happen. And that was a real turning point, I think, in this whole journey. So it is always an honor and a pleasure to welcome Gerry Braun.
Oh, thank you, Reverend Dolan and Anne, and welcome to everyone. What I hope we will be able to do is look at what our church did, recognizing that if we had it all to do over again, we wouldn't do it the same way, because we learned a lot and a lot has changed. And so I'm going to try to highlight some of those things that have changed and what they mean for the future. Generally, we need to define net zero carbon and solar electricity in that context. And then I'm just going to go through the steps that we took there. Each step was a change that we made. We learned something from each step. And energy cost was a big factor in each step, as you might imagine. And then I'll have a little bit to say about how does what we did in a church context and not-for-profit context, because I think what we learned a lot that's applicable broadly, not just to other congregations, but to not-for-profits in general. And then we'll have comments and questions. And I hope people will offer comments as well as questions. Net zero carbon is basically the difference between the amount of energy that is used and the amount that's produced on site. And one of the inspirations for net zero carbon in Davis is basically that UC Davis has a net zero carbon community of about a few thousand students that was started well before a decade or so ago, and it has been very successful and saved money at the same time. Generally, builders and developers don't aspire to do anything in energy other than what's mandated by local building codes. And it's interesting that as of a year ago, California now mandates net zero electricity for new buildings, but not net zero carbon. Construction of new buildings causes building energy use to increase and global greenhouse emissions to increase by about 2% every year. And one more sobering thing is that the construction materials and what they call embedded emissions from building buildings around the world accounts for over 10% of global greenhouse emissions. So that's a given. More buildings are being built. What can we do with existing buildings? That's what we were dealing with in our project. Solar electricity, just briefly, as you probably all know, there's a lot of solar electricity being generated out in very sunny places. It's the cheapest way to generate solar electricity, but it has a very high cost of transporting the electricity to where it's used, and significant environmental impacts depending on the individual project. On-site solar electricity for homes, it has a significantly higher production costs, but less transport costs, and has an absolutely minimal environmental impact. And non-residential is kind of in the middle between very large and small. But one thing that I don't think is well enough understood is that on-site electricity accounts for almost as much solar electricity generated across the state as bulk electricity, from big power plants. And that is a credit to well over 1 million folks who have adopted on-site solar electricity. So net zero electricity is the key to net zero carbon, because if you generate as much electricity as you use from solar, and then and then basically switch from gas to electricity for heating purposes, basically, you are then able to achieve net zero carbon. The Church of St. Martin basically moved forward on solar in 3 major steps. One was a very early, I think the project started in around 2002, but we started having electricity from our office roof in 2004. We'll talk a little bit more about a solar carport project that was completed in 2014, and we capped it off with a big array on our classroom building in 2020. One of the things that was necessary because of what I mentioned, the fact that we are a not-for-profit, not eligible for tax credits, we ended up signing a power purchase agreement for the electricity from the carport, and it accounts for nearly 60% of our total on-site production. And then in parallel, in at least 6 separate steps, maybe more, we were able to replace gas appliances with heat pump appliances. Heat pumps use electricity rather than gas. And as a result, if you look at the chart, you'll see that solar electricity went up while net electricity use from the grid was going down. And we're now at a point where, thanks to COVID and using less electricity last year, we are essentially net zero and then some. I'm going to go back through and kind of in a little numerical way. I mentioned the first solar array on our office roof. One bit of interesting experience is that you need to pay attention to the things that use energy as well as the things that produce energy. When we had the site inspections, bidders came through to look at what they could do in 2014. We discovered that one of the key components on this array was no longer functioning. And so we ended up having to replace that both inverters, they're called, they convert DC to AC electricity. We had to replace both of them with one inverter. And that's a lesson to pay attention to how the equipment is working. And one of the first things we did when we restarted our solar and decarbonization effort is we took inventory, especially on our carbon footprint. And you'll notice that there are 3 important uses of energy that produce greenhouse gases: electricity, natural gas, and although water supply isn't a major factor, it is in some parts of California, not this part. And we've done quite a bit that I should give credit to our Building and Grounds Committee for really reducing our water usage by probably at least 50% over the last several years. It didn't have a big impact on carbon, but it had a big impact on something that is a critical issue in our community. So basically, gas and electricity determine a site's carbon footprint. And our site is about the equivalent of 6 to 8 homes in Davis, mostly from natural gas, as I mentioned, the lion's share, and a decreasing share from on-site electricity use. This is, and I hate to put up a big spreadsheet or what have you, but it really goes back to the need that the very first step is to really take inventory. Once you're serious about decarbonization, take inventory of how you use energy, what does it cost? And it's important not just in terms of being able to size equipment to or solar arrays to meet the usage, but it's important, especially important from a cost perspective. And you'll notice that, I'm not asking you to look carefully, but 80% of our electricity bill, gas usage was most of our carbon footprint, but electricity was 80% of our utility bills. And what's more, and this was extremely important, is that our electricity usage, the price we paid varied with the time of day and the time of year. And during some periods of time, we were paying 3 times as much for electricity than the average or the minimum. And what that meant, because our solar arrays were so-called net metered, we got credit for the electricity we produced during those very high price periods with the grid electricity. That helped the economics of the project a great deal, and it is very important, therefore, to make sure we are producing as much as we can during those high price periods. And of course, you need to pay attention to a lot of things. And one thing that's important to pay attention to is what time of year are you using energy? Because we're now, things shift. We're now probably going to have our peak electricity usage more in the winter than in the summer, as we were before. So I mentioned the carport, and I also mentioned that nonprofit organizations can't take tax credits. So we asked our bidders on this particular project to assist in financing. And at the time, this was a small project, and doing the work to negotiate agreements to help finance projects was not something that was really typically offered. But we did find one company that did some pioneering and offered power purchase and leasing options, and we were able, therefore, to be able to add this capacity without an outlay of cash from the church. So we have a 25-year power purchase agreement, which started at 18 cents per kilowatt hour, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but that's a little bit less than you're paying for your grid electricity right now. And the escalation on that contract is a lot less. And one of the important things we did negotiate was that if the array didn't produce as much as it was supposed to, there would be penalties. And that turns out to have been very important to have in the contract. And we this was an interesting ride. In the early years, we had probably 3 or 4 equipment failures that, fortunately we were paying attention. Janet Lane in particular, the chair of our Building and Grounds Committee, noticed that the inverters weren't working or other things weren't going right, and we were able to get the contractor out to fix the problems. But again, a major lesson is to monitor performance very carefully. We discovered after a few years that that the array, this carport, was not producing as much electricity as had been advertised. And we invoked the penalty clause in the contract and basically have been compensated for the underperformance. One other note I'll come back to a little bit later is the Central Valley around Davis is a very dusty area, especially in the spring and summer. And in the dry season, which is when most of the best production occurs, you can basically increase your production by in the neighborhood of 10% just by washing the panels. I mentioned we were the parallel thing to the solar part of the project was electrifying space heating. And this is just a kind of a list of what of the upgrades. But one thing was early on, and this was actually something that was very important, that we learned that what are called mini split units, which basically are outside. The heat pump is outside, but it's connected to the air air handler inside via just a coolant coolant and refrigerant passing through the wall. These are very efficient, and thanks to their efficiency, we started to use them. We basically used them in as many cases as we could, and we expected that that we would be using more electricity as a result of basically doing more heating with electricity. It turned out that that was not the case. The efficiency of the units that we replaced had probably degraded as much as 30% over time, and the reduced electricity consumption for cooling offset the increased electricity consumption. Okay, so step 4 was a question of trying to get, we were in the process of doing something in the direction of decarbonization, but we thought it would be a good idea to see if we could set a goal. And some of us proposed a goal to our financial committee, and the response was they didn't see why you would replace currently working and reasonably functional appliances. In other words, wait until they break. And so we didn't set a goal. But somewhat fortuitously or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, we detected a gas leak in the line coming into the campus. And then the biggest heating and cooling unit for the gathering space stopped working, and we had to replace it. So it was it was kind of a be careful of what you wish for, but it one of the lessons was that when you do replace something before you need to, you may be avoiding some real serious inconvenience. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, you're not losing money. You may be saving money by replacing something even before it breaks, and that's something that we learned. The other thing we learned, I think, and I'll say I learned this, going to a group of people who are not energy folks and not necessarily haven't given a lot of thought to some of the things we're talking about here, and talking about climate change, and why there's a moral imperative to do things like we're talking about. That turned out to be not a good idea. But at the time it was necessary because we really couldn't make the case that we're going to save a lot of money. We can make it now, but at the time, I think we got kind of a cold shoulder from our vestry because we were talking to some folks who maybe politically were not receptive to the concern about climate change. So it's a good lesson, and I'll come back to that later. Okay, step 5, restarting again. So we, I guess I've covered some of this. Just taking a very careful look at what we had accomplished at up to that point. Pamela mentioned getting a meeting where we reviewed what the data was, and part of the trigger for that was noticing that the carport wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, but it led to a more complete review, and we learned that we were still using the same amount of grid of electricity overall as we had been several years before, even though we had changed a lot of the heating equipment. So the lesson here is just do the arithmetic. Sanity, checking the energy billing and making sure there are no surprises, enforcing the power purchase terms, those were crucial to getting to where we are. So the briefing, we basically asked ourselves how much had we gotten done to date with the investments we'd already made, how close were we to the net zero finish line, and what would it take to get the rest of the way. And Stan Forbes, who at the time was our finance committee chair, then proposed a way to finance the remaining steps. And I will say at this point, Stan and others, and I can't mention everybody, but a lot of the things that got done were done because of donations, and it was a very helpful thing. Although at this point, looking back, at least starting now, these projects pay for themselves, so the donations may be a part of the project that doesn't necessarily apply going forward. So we had some remaining steps to do. We had to think about an additional solar array. We needed to think about water heating as well as space heating, and we had some additional space heating to do with electricity, solar electricity. So we were hoping all along, I think, to create a replicable model for other Northern California churches in our diocese. And I think that was something that Stan particularly started taking a leadership role in. And I think we're making good progress. We probably won't talk about it, but there's a lot of interest around, and I think, and there should be, among churches that can save money by doing what we did. So steps, let's see, this is the third solar array, which we just celebrated a week or two ago, as Pamela mentioned, and it gets us to net zero. And we were, one of the things that I think was part of our policy was to look to local retailers. Part of the virtue of what we're doing, what we did, is to help the local economy, and as well as do something for ourselves. the so we did run into some additional hiccups here. The contractor we selected specialized in residential installations. They were very eager to do this project, but they were not as experienced with commercial projects as they were with residential. So there were delays and there were uh, things that made us worry a lot about whether it would be possible in this case we were financing the project with the help of federal tax credits, and we had to get the project in by the end of 2019. So the most recent experience is just kind of the last things we thought we needed to do. One thing we thought we knew we needed to do was to replace the remaining gas furnaces and then replace the gas water heater that serves the kitchen area. And I'll take responsibility for this, we didn't know that that the stove was using a lot of gas because typically, cooking doesn't take that much gas. But it turned out that the commercial stoves have pilot lights that run 24/7, and we it turned out that we were using $40 worth of gas every month, even during the period in 2020 when the stove was never used to cook anything. So we learned that, and kind of wrapping up on the church, there's still more to do. We will likely replace the kitchen stove with a gas stove having electronic ignition, and in terms of the carbon footprint, we can hopefully be able to switch to renewable gas when PG&E offers it. In the longer term, again, just to harp a little bit on cleaning dirt off solar arrays. This is the photo is is a nozzle that I bought at the hardware store to hose off the array on our home. The arrays on our home takes about less than 5 minutes, and it increases the amount of electricity you're getting by about 10%. So it's very well worth doing. I think I'm going to switch just to where we think we are recovering our net zero carbon investments in about 10 years. And as a result of the electricity prices going up, grid electricity prices going up, and our costs going down, our overall energy bill is probably about $10,000 per month less than it would have been. And that's a big deal. And it doesn't, if you don't look at the numbers over time, you don't notice it. But that's quite a big deal in terms of if we had never started the project we did. And it's not been cheap. The whole project, probably, if you include parishioner donations and other investments and replacing things that broke and so forth, we've probably spent over $100,000 just getting to net zero, but we would have spent most of that anyway, replacing things that needed to be replaced. So again, the savings are worth going after, and especially now. PG&E is looking at an 8% increase in 2021. Basically that's money that we would have paid for grid electricity. We won't have to. And it's, who knows what happens after 2021. We're kind of at a point where it's going to be interesting to see what happens when things get back to normal. But I'm quite confident that we we have a pretty good idea where we will be. Um, you know, sometimes people, I don't advertise myself as a renewable energy expert, although I've been involved in renewable energy for a long time, because I don't want people to think that doing what we did is hard and that you have to be an expert. As a matter of fact, everybody has the expertise to do what we did, because we all buy things and we all pretty much are, careful consumers. And when people say, "Well, what do I have to do? What do I need to know about solar energy?" And I say, "Well, get 3 bids, ask questions, and think about supporting local businesses that provide, the answers and competitive prices, because it's another way of giving back to the community." And interestingly, people do ask me about solar, and some of our members of our church community did ask, and they went ahead and adopted solar. None of them asked about greenhouse gases or electrification. So most of the people who went with solar are happy they did, but I thought it was interesting that the questions were were very general. One thing that has changed is that we now have in California, we have a lot of solar. I think 12% of Yolo County's electricity comes from rooftops and things like that. That's a lot. And the growth has been absolutely consistent over the last few years, but really it's happened. The big changes have happened over the last 5 years. And that's worth noticing, because change can be very fast with on-site solar. And the other thing is that costs have come down by about a factor of 3 over basically a 10-year period. So people, carry forward what they know into the future, and sometimes it isn't true anymore. Solar was, kind of a moderately defensible economic proposition 5 or 10 years ago. It's now a very, very attractive proposition, and it's just because costs have come down. Um, so, um, so we're, the, I guess I would just say that I'm very interested in what we can do on the retrofit side with solar. One thing that I didn't mention is that, well, I'll mention it here. Let's see. In my last bullet is that in Davis, solar arrays on homes use only about 1/3 to 1/2 of the unshaded roof space. And sometimes folks say, well, it's better to plant trees. But in fact, the solar arrays shade the roof just like trees do. So you get the extra benefit of, of less heating up your home and having to cool it. The other thing is that I'm hoping that it just really is painful to have to take things in steps where you are allowed to size a solar array to what your historical usage was, and then when you electrify, your usage will go up in most cases, and you then have to add another array. And I think that brings me to the kind of my kind of summary point is that if we do projects for not-for-profits in the future, it will be extremely important to do the project, in one step, or, rather than 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. And it should be possible if the right kind of financing is available. For example, low interest loans on a revolving loan basis, and that sort of thing. And some of these things are being actively discussed, and I'm very hopeful that we get a breakthrough in that direction. So last slide. We have enough in most cities, except for the big ones, have enough unshaded, code compliant roof area to produce more solar electricities than existing buildings require. That there was some debate about that a long time ago, but it's pretty clear now that we have plenty of roof space. And basically 100% of decarbonization at the city and county level is technically feasible. It's affordable. It would cost local governments almost nothing while strengthening local economies, and it would increase property tax revenues and buffer communities from grid power cutoffs. What more could you want? So I think what I like to say is that the most hopeful response to climate change is all hands on deck. Everybody needs to do their part. We can't outsource the problem to the state or to the country or what have you. And I think messaging is important. It doesn't matter whether it depends on your audience. Save creation by saving money, or save money by saving creation. It's the same message. And I think we need to choose our messages based on who we're talking to. We know enough to do that. Anyway, I hope there will be comments. I'm looking forward to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gerry. Not a lot of people are on camera, but those who are, we can wave our hands. You can use the little reaction button to share your thanks. I haven't seen a lot of questions. Nick, have you in the chat box? Okay, well then maybe what we can do is have people raise your hand electronically, or let us know if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. As Gerry said, he's happy to just kind of talk with people. So I'm scrolling through here. Robin raised her hand. Now I have to find you. Robin, I'm going to ask you to unmute. See if that works. Robin.
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Hi, great. Welcome. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm the facilitator for the Climate Crisis Action Team at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis.
Yay.
And we have a sub-team that is looking at exactly what you folks have done at moving toward greater efficiency of energy use and decarbonization. So this is all extremely helpful. I'm wondering about sort of your decision-making process, how many different groups and committees and so on needed to approve the various steps along the way, and also sort of behavioral changes that were necessary. So in managing the new equipment, for example, how much education did you have to do so people knew when, what had to be turned in off and on when, and those kinds of things?
Well, others can comment on this. I'm particularly impressed with the work of our Building and Grounds Committee. They have been, they have been outstanding, doing a lot of the things that you mentioned. I think we have to probably up our game a little bit in terms of the kind of digging into the numbers. I mean, we don't have we really don't have a committee to do that. Yeah, yeah. Our Care for Creation commission was also extremely helpful in terms of just almost being the sponsor for a lot of what we did. And of course, our rector, Reverend Dolan, and her predecessor. So we've had a lot of participation. It was really a team effort across the board, but not very, not, how do I say it, not very structured. When something needed to be done, we knew who to talk to. We have a couple of attorneys, for example, who provided invaluable help with the power purchase agreement. I could go on, and I really am kind of sorry that I can't mention everybody, but it was a team effort. But the structure was, I think you could probably just have a single group that comes from different different elements of the different um, interest groups in the congregation, and just form a group and draw from each of the others to have a little committee. I think that would work.
If I could jump in, Robin, I think to add to how Gerry answered your question, I think how you go about it in terms of which groups need to be involved at your church, I'm learning it depends a lot on the polity of your church and sort of the internal culture of your church as well. And thinking about what Gerry said about how it really would be preferable to do it in 1 or 2 steps instead of many, many, many steps over a long period of time. So if people can learn from us, learn from what we would do differently if we could do it all over again, as well as what went really well. It does seem to me that having a group whose sole purpose is to figure this out might make that 1 or 2 step process much more feasible. And in our church, there's one group that deals with finances, and one group that deals with buildings and grounds, and for God's creation. All these different groups, as I know you have many groups, but I don't think there was one that was pulled together just for the purpose of, as you said, you're talking about a climate emergency or a climate crisis group. That's a great place to start, it sounds like to me. There was something else you asked that about the learning of how to behavior change. I think we're on a learning curve with that, as Gerry also alluded to. We need to put systems in place to make sure that we're doing the cleaning when it needs to be done, and things like that we're not that are just still fairly new to us as we think through how to make best use of what we have.
And can I ask about one follow-up question?
Sure.
Or are other people waiting to ask questions?
I think there's just one other question that I'm aware of, so go ahead.
So just big picture. So are we thinking in the right order here is my question. So the first thing we're thinking of doing is to go to being an ultra green customer of Valley Clean Energy. And that supports this sort of community goal of getting everybody to be greener, because we're essentially paying more into the pot for that to happen. Then we do the things like swap out the old inefficient appliances, double pane some undouble paned windows, make all those efficiency improvements, get the right kind of light bulbs, all of that. And then we do the solar after all that other stuff is done. Is that just big picture, the right kind of order, given what you said?
Well, I like that order. It's not, but I would also say that there, the right order has changed. It do, but be careful from a, I guess from from a climate action perspective, I think that's the right order. From an economic perspective, I would almost say do the things that save the most money the quickest. I mean, don't wait, especially with solar. We have, the Public Utilities Commission, as we speak, is looking at how to ratchet down on the, what you get for the electricity that you exchange with the grid. In other words, right now it's valued at the same as what you use, and that's changing because in effect I think the PUC and the utilities realize this is a good deal for people. It doesn't have to be this good a deal. Why are we why don't we help the poor starving utility? I'm just kidding. But seriously, things are changing, continue to change. And the changes, in my view, are very, very much in the direction of do it now. Do the things that are going to save you money. Do them now. You don't know how long the tax credits are going to be available, if you're going to be able to leverage them. You don't know what utility rates are going to be. But if you look at the last 10 years, everything that's happened has been in the direction of you wish you had done it already. So I just say, it doesn't matter where you start, but try to do it in one step or two if you can, because if you value all the work that goes into taking all these steps, it's better to get it done in one or two.
That's really helpful. We have at least 3 people who have questions. Let's see, Nick first, and then Anne Cassidy Stone, and then Neil.
Thanks, Gerry. I'm Nick Buxton. I'm a member of St. Martin's and part of the team that's been involved with this project. One of the things I've been, and I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it, Gerry, but I was just wondering what you see about the role of churches in terms of actually moving not just to producing electricity, but becoming microgrids. And I was particularly thinking of, the context of having more climate disasters like fires and blackouts, and the possibility for churches even to be a place where you could go and charge your phone in an emergency, and whether that's something we should be part of kind of future thinking around this. And another issue I was just wondering is around the kind of purchasing, whether there's ways, and this is more, I guess, the power of the church collectively, is about whether we could, there's a certain purchasing power, and if churches got together and actually chose to actually support businesses that were building community wealth, so actually actively employed people coming out of prison, the whole idea of kind of turning prisons, people who are going to the prisons right now into stead workers in the green economy, whether you think there's, what about those kind of issues? Is there a way that the church can leverage perhaps its collective power to kind of put those kind of issues on the agenda?
Well, thank you for those questions or those thoughts, because what I see happening is that because of the wildfires and the public safety power shutoffs and so forth, this is really serious. We used to think of the electricity grid as being, I did anyway, as being highly reliable. But when you think about the public safety power shutoffs, the reliability has gone way down. And if I did actually think of the question you asked, Nick, kind of independently, and I didn't come up with I came up with a kind of, on the one hand this, and on the other hand that. As churches can kind of get by, I think, better than some other kinds of organizations if they have to just rely on, for example, solar arrays. Most people don't know this, but you can disconnect from the grid, and while the sun is shining, you have power. So, and most churches don't, necessarily need to run all 24/7. So in terms of the reliability and resilience aspect, I think it's a case by case call, but microgrids are much easier to implement behind the meter than trying to do it as on a as a community microgrid or something like that. And certainly, that we're going to see more offers to do that, for organizations that want more reliability and resilience. We're going to see those kind of offers coming forward. And I think, just in terms of the learning, I think that that's something that would be not expensive, and there would be benefits. And, in a way, using the church as a kind of an exemplar of what other people can do that may need it more than the church does, but and thinking in terms of people, disadvantaged communities especially. I mean, the church has an opportunity to pilot some things that would be especially valuable in disadvantaged communities, and certainly the microgrids, and connecting solar to a microgrid so that you have power for people who otherwise are not getting the best possible service from the big grid.
Great. Is that, Nick, did you want to follow up, or?
I think, I don't know how much time we got, but we should allow a few other people.
Okay. Anne Stone. Let's see, I'm finding you and asking you to unmute. Here we go.
Video. Yeah, it's actually Walt. We're here
sorry.
together.
Okay.
We're here together.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
We're on. Yeah, my name is Ann Cassidy Stone. I think the questions I have maybe are best answered on the Cool Davis, which I didn't see until just a minute ago, that link. But I was just wondering about, are there lists somewhere of local vendors, first of all, and is Cool Davis the best place to find that sort of thing? And secondly, if like we have roof space, we have quite a bit of roof space, I think, potentially. And we have a furnace that's gas. So if we wanted to convert, and we have no solar. So if we wanted to convert to electric heating as well, is the same vendor involved? Are the same vendors involved in bidding the entire project, or is that something that gets broken down by which aspect you want work on? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, going back to Nick's question, at some point, I think there will be an integrator available, where you want to do everything and have it working all together as part of a microgrid or something like that. Right now, no. The solar contractors only do solar. The HVAC contractors only do HVAC, and in fact, sometimes they only do gas. And when you hire them to do electricity, sometimes things don't go as well as they could. That didn't happen at St. Martin's, but it happened here at home. Yeah, you are kind of stuck pulling the project together from the independent pieces, but if you want to just look at it in terms of the way things are now, do the heating retrofit, find out how much that that will change how much electricity you are using to some extent. Then you can size the solar array to be, for all of your uses. Now, the kind of the joker in the deck is electric vehicles. People are, starting to use those too. And right now the rules don't favor one or two steps. They, it's kind of like you buy an electric vehicle and start to use it, and suddenly your solar array is too small. So one of the things to ask is, what can we do to size things so that we don't have to go back and add capacity? How can you do the project so that, as much as possible, everything happens, coincident, at the same
In one shot, yeah.
Yeah, in one shot.
Yeah.
And I think that's coming. Unfortunately, it's kind of way under the policy radar at the state level. I think the city, for example, and the county could help with that. Maybe Valley Clean Energy could help with that. I don't know.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. That might actually relate to what Carol was asking in the chat. Carol, Neil's hand is raised and you asked a question in the chat, so I'm not sure if you have two separate questions. I'm going to assume you do. But I don't know if I can find that question now. Hold on. Carol asked, Gerry, do you foresee policy changes that would enable homeowners to add solar capacity in excess of historical usage?
I do, but that's because I'm an optimist. I think it's going to require, a push. And unfortunately, the push probably needs to come from the solar industry on behalf of their customers. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that they mind having to do two separate solar projects. So yeah, I'm hoping that just the communities and cities and counties realizing that this is economically inefficient and it hurts the local economy, and maybe on their long to-do list of what they can get the state to do to help, they will add that. I don't know.
Great, great. And Neil, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, my question has to do with the Peter Principle, which is that we have had solar on our house for, I guess, about 15 years, a little more than that. And my acrophobia is inconsistent with climbing up on the roof to wash the panels. And I strongly suspect that we've lost an inverter along the way or something like that. Are there companies locally who deal specifically with the maintenance of solar arrays?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I talked with one of my friends who is, owner of a solar retailer, and said, maybe you could get, maybe you could create a little side business here, get some interns to set it up and, offer this. And, it's kind of like, yeah, that's probably a good idea, but I don't think we will. But back to your, to the thought, it does require getting up on a ladder that you have to get up as high as the roof on the ladder. But if you get the right nozzle, you can cover the whole array. All you have to do is spray the array with water. And it takes, like I said, 5 minutes. So if you have acrophobia, don't do it, of course. Or, make a game of it and get, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm thinking we do.
Thank you, Gerry.
Our little scissors lift. Maybe we just need to get one of those. Have a day where we take that around to different people's homes. We're a little bit over time, but let's see. I wanted to make sure that people saw what Nick put in the chat here. that the city of Davis is having a consultation available on their next climate action plan. So the meeting is this Thursday, which is appropriate because that is Earth Day, and that's at 6:30, and there's a link in there. So I think that that is an opportunity for those of us who are thinking about these things seriously, who are worried about policy issues and just want to be, part of the solution, as we say, can be included in that. And Neil's spouse says she is not afraid of heights. I think that's where that was going. Okay, I am, but anyway, we won't get into that conversation right now. Let's see, this is gonna have to be the last question, I think, and we'll have to keep it quick. I'm going to ask, it says Chuck Salix, I'm thinking that might be Susan. Can you unmute yourself? Oh, no, I'm sorry, I double clicked, hold on. Try again, there we go.
Actually, it is Chuck.
It is Chuck, okay, great. Hi, Chuck.
We had an interesting experience about 5 years ago when our forced air heater went out of commission. And we had someone come out, a local company, and the guy basically looked at the heater and asked, how old is it? And we said 26 years. And he said, you need a new heater. Here's the bill, $8,000. And then I had a friend who said, you really need to have a second opinion. And we had a second guy come out, and it turns out the only thing wrong with the heater was it needed a new igniter, which cost $200. At the time we made the change, and I also looked into the efficiency of forced air heaters. They're only about 10% more efficient now than they were 25 years ago, from what I understand. So I'm looking at it as kind of, we're better off kind of keeping the old thing going as long as we can versus putting a huge amount of capital into a new system, especially when the efficiency is just slightly more than what we have now. Are there other things that I should be thinking about when I'm looking at a situation like this?
Yeah, there are actually. If you, you should run the numbers, but I would not be surprised if a heat pump that was, this is a big distinction, a heat pump heater, space heater, powered by solar is probably going to save you quite a bit of money over time versus even a gas heater that lasts forever. That's because solar, literally the payback period on the solar electricity is about 6 or 7 years, and it's going to last for 25 or 30. So if you look at it on a life cycle basis, yes, it would make sense to replace it. If you're looking at it on a first cost basis, and people do, I'll replace it when it breaks. No, you wouldn't do it. So I think it just depends on, I really encourage people to look at things on a life cycle basis, because that changes, that is a completely different perspective.
That was such a great question. It was part of the conversation that happened at St. Martin's over a number of years, trying to figure out how do you hold on to things for as long as you can, which feels like the right thing to do. I think that's how many of us were sort of raised to think of being careful with what we've put our money into, and not just throwing it out at the first sign of trouble. We were able to, I know, not just throw things out. Don't worry, not everything just ended up in the landfill. But you know what I mean. Literally, that's a hard mindset change. I think that's where having these conversations feels so important. So that was a great question, Chuck. I think we are about to wrap up. I know that this is a lot of information. We have recorded this, this presentation. Gerry, I think you said we can share the slides with people whoever wants them. We've had some requests from people from out of town and things like that. So, and also that will help you with some of the more complex screenshots that were a little bit harder to see. And we just want to encourage people, you know, we've got Care for God's Creation is continuing to think about not just, okay, now we're net zero, but what can we do then? What's the next thing? The next thing seems like it's how do you work on sequestering carbon? How do you work on actually being now a positive force as opposed to just reducing our harm? And so still lots to learn, lots of other areas besides solar. It's not as simple as just slapping a solar panel on a building, as we've all learned today. But this is really something to celebrate and just a wonderful accomplishment. So Nick or Anne, do you have anything you want to say before we sign off? All right, Nick? You couldn't decide. Okay. Well, there's lots going on this week. We're gonna be sending out lots of information about Earth Week stuff, Earth Day stuff, and again, I just really want to thank Gerry for this fabulous presentation and what it represents in terms of all the work that he has put into helping us get to this point, because we couldn't have done it without him. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.